Glucose has always mattered. It's always been quietly running the show inside your body. But for most of human history, we had no way to actually see it, no way to watch what was happening in real time. It was all going on behind the scenes, invisible, silent. But now we have the technology. Continuous glucose monitors, little devices you wear on your arm that track your blood sugar around the clock. And what they're showing us is, honestly, a bit alarming. Here's the number that stopped me cold. 1 billion people on this planet right now have either type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. 1 billion. And that number isn't holding steady, it's climbing. Every single day. But here's where it gets heavier. Even in people with no diagnosis, no health conditions, no red flags on their annual checkup, up to 80% of them are still having what's called glucose spikes every single day without knowing it. And those spikes aren't harmless. They show up in your life as brain fog, mood crashes, fertility problems, acne, and, this one really hits, faster aging. Your body is quietly paying a price you didn't know you were being charged. Now, glucose is just the scientific name for what most people call blood sugar. Same thing. And for a long time, most people had never even heard the word. But that's shifting. Slowly, steadily, people are waking up to it. And that shift, that awareness, is genuinely exciting. Though here's the funny thing about watching something change gradually. Imagine you've been standing in a room every single day for 5 years watching a dial turn one tiny notch at a time. Day by day, you barely notice anything. But then you look back at where the dial started and your jaw drops. That's what it feels like from the inside, like the frog in the slowly boiling water. You're so close to it, so deep in it every day, that the massive change sneaks up on you. But compare today to 5 years ago, the difference is enormous.
So what's actually happening inside your body when you eat something sugary or starchy? Let's make this simple. There are really 2 categories of food that directly affect your blood sugar. Starches, things like bread, rice, pasta, potatoes, oats, and sugars, everything from apple pie to orange juice to that handful of fruit you thought was totally innocent. Both of these, at the molecular level, are literally built from glucose. When you eat them, your body breaks them apart, and individual glucose molecules flood into your bloodstream. Eat a little, a gentle rise. Eat a lot of starches and sugars at once, a massive wave of glucose crashes into your blood all at once, and that's the spike. That's the sharp peak you'd see shooting up on a glucose monitor graph. Now, a spike here and there, not the end of the world. Your body can handle the occasional wave. But when those spikes are big and they're happening constantly, which for most people they are, that's when your body starts paying a serious price behind the scenes. 3 things happen every time you spike hard. First, your mitochondria, the tiny power plants inside every one of your cells, get chronically exhausted. That's where a lot of that bone-deep, coffee-won't-fix-it fatigue comes from. Second, there's a process called glycation, which is essentially your body's version of rusting from the inside. It speeds up aging at the cellular level. And third, your body floods the system with insulin, your blood sugar's cleanup crew, trying desperately to get all that glucose out of your blood and somewhere safe. Each of those 3 processes, on their own, has real consequences. Together, running day after day, meal after meal, they underpin pretty much every negative thing glucose spikes do to your body. And most people have no idea it's happening.
Think about the mitochondria as tiny factories inside every cell. Their one job is to take glucose and turn it into energy. The energy your brain uses to think, your heart uses to beat, your eyes use to read these words right now. Every cell, every organ, every function in your body runs on what these little factories produce. So the logical conclusion seems obvious. More glucose equals more energy. Give the factories more raw material and they'll produce more output. But biology doesn't work like that. And here's a simple image that makes it click immediately. Plants need water to live. But give a plant too much water and it drowns. Roots rot. The very thing it needs to survive becomes the thing that kills it when there's too much of it. The human body works the same way with glucose. Some glucose, steady, beautiful energy. Too much glucose arriving at once, and the mitochondria start freaking out. They get overwhelmed. They go on strike. And when the mitochondria go on strike, they can't make energy efficiently anymore. And what you feel as a human being when that's happening is chronic fatigue. That bone-deep exhaustion where the thought of going to the grocery store or picking up your kids feels genuinely mountainous, where you wake up already tired, where no amount of sleep seems to fix it. And here's the cruel trick. When you're in that state, what do you reach for? Something sweet, something with sugar. Because a moment after eating it, you feel a brief lift, a small buzz of energy, and it seems like it's working. But that lift isn't energy, it's dopamine. Sugar releases dopamine in the brain, the same molecule that gets released during sex, during video games, during illegal drugs. It's a pleasure. It mimics the feeling of energy just long enough to convince you that you've fixed the problem, while on the inside, the mitochondria are being damaged further. The factories are being overwhelmed again, and the fatigue gets worse over time, not better, no matter how many croissants or orange juices or sweet things you reach for to push through it. You're being tricked, repeatedly, by the very thing making you tired. And on top of that, stressed mitochondria release free radicals, compounds that drive inflammation throughout the body. And inflammation is a slow, systemic, damage-everything process that connects to almost every chronic disease there is. That's consequence number 1. Consequence number 2 involves a chicken in an oven. When you put a raw chicken in to cook, it goes from pink to brown. That process of browning has a name. It's called glycation. The same thing happens when you toast bread. The heat drives a chemical reaction that browns and changes the structure of the food. Here's the part that's genuinely unsettling. From the moment you're born, you are slowly doing the same thing on the inside, slowly glycating, slowly browning, slowly cooking. And when you're fully cooked, you die. That's aging at a molecular level. Look at the cartilage of a newborn baby. It's white. Look at the cartilage of a 90-year-old. It's brown. They've been cooking from the inside for 90 years. Every glucose spike accelerates that process. The word glycation and the word glucose even sound similar, and that's not a coincidence. It's glucose doing the glycating. More spikes, faster cooking, accelerated aging. You see it on the skin as wrinkles arriving earlier than they should. You feel it as organs slowly losing function. The damage is real, cumulative, and almost entirely invisible until it isn't. Now, the body isn't passive in all of this. It knows a big glucose spike is dangerous, and it responds immediately. The pancreas gets the signal and releases insulin, and insulin is genuinely heroic in her job. She grabs the excess glucose molecules flooding the blood and stores them away, into the liver first, then the muscles, and when those are full, into the fat cells, which is one of the primary ways body fat accumulates, not from eating fat, from the body trying to protect itself from glucose spikes by tucking the excess away somewhere it can't cause immediate damage. But insulin itself, released over and over in response to spike after spike, has consequences. It's the driver behind insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. The protective mechanism used too often becomes its own problem. And the cycle tightens over time. Keep spiking, and the body's ability to manage those spikes gets worse. The spikes get bigger. The insulin response gets more extreme. The mitochondria get more fatigued. The glycation accelerates. The inflammation builds. One meal at a time, one spike at a time, quietly, invisibly, until suddenly, it isn't quiet anymore. Here's something that should genuinely change how you think about the gym. If your muscles are bigger, if you use them regularly, they are constantly hungry for glucose. They act like an additional storage tank, pulling excess glucose out of your blood and using it for fuel. So the best time to eat a cookie, if you really love cookies, is right after a workout. Your muscles are depleted. They want the glucose, and they'll absorb it before it has a chance to spike your blood and trigger all the damage that follows. The more muscle mass you carry, the better equipped your body is to handle that hit. So take two people, same cookie,
same moment. One is bigger, more muscular. One is smaller, leaner. Their glucose responses could be dramatically different, not because one person is healthier in some abstract sense, but because the body composition itself changes how the glucose gets handled. The bigger, more muscular person has more storage capacity. The glucose gets absorbed faster, and the spike stays smaller. But muscle mass is just one piece of it. The variables that shape your individual glucose response go much deeper than that. How hydrated you are, how stressed you are, the state of your microbiome, your genetics, where you are in your hormonal cycle if you're female, how well you slept last night. All of these things are running in the background every time you eat, quietly adjusting the outcome. Which means you cannot look at someone else's glucose monitor and draw any meaningful conclusion about your own body. There are too many moving parts. Genetics alone tells a fascinating story. Some people are better at growing fat cells, expanding them in number and size, which gives the body a larger reservoir to dump excess glucose into when a spike hits. People of South Asian descent, for example, tend to have a harder time expanding fat cell storage, which sounds like a good thing, until you realize what it actually means. The glucose has nowhere to go, no extra reservoir to absorb it, so the spikes run bigger and the damage accumulates faster. The body is trying to protect itself, but the tools available to it are limited. Now, here's where it gets personal, because this is the moment that tends to stop people cold. You put on a continuous glucose monitor, you go about your normal life, you eat the things you've always eaten, the things you've always considered healthy, and the monitor tells you a completely different story. Things you've been eating for years, things you genuinely believed were good for you, lighting up the graph in ways that make your stomach drop a little. Two of the biggest surprises: honey and grapes. Grapes first. You think it's a fruit. It's natural. It grew on a vine. It's fine. But here's the thing. The fruit you find in a supermarket today is not natural, not in any meaningful sense of that word. It is the product of thousands of years of human breeding, specifically designed to make fruit sweeter, juicier, more appealing. The same way humans took gray wolves and bred them generation after generation into chihuahuas and golden retrievers, we did that to fruit. We took wild berries and small tart things and we bred them into these perfect, seedless, sugar-packed little packages. A grape, when you actually look at it honestly, is essentially a concentrated dose of sugar wearing the costume of a healthy snack. Not all fruit hits the same way, though. Berries tend to be lower in sugar and create a much smaller spike. Tropical fruits, bananas, mangoes, papayas, along with grapes, sit at the other end of that scale. High sugar, significant spike. But even with those, a whole piece of fruit comes with fiber. And that fiber matters enormously because it slows down how fast the glucose hits your blood. It acts as a buffer. It softens the spike. The moment you remove that fiber, everything changes. Juice. Orange juice specifically. This is the one that tends to genuinely upset people because it feels so innocent. It comes from oranges. Oranges are healthy. Therefore, orange juice is healthy. The logic seems airtight. But when you squeeze the fruit and extract the liquid, you are stripping away the protective fiber and leaving behind concentrated sugar water. That glass of orange juice in the morning hits your blood glucose almost identically to a can of cola. And people push back on that hard because they say, but the sugar in orange juice is natural. It comes from a piece of fruit. And that's true. But here's the thing. The sugar in a can of cola is also natural. It comes from sugar beets or sugar cane, plants, just like the orange. So the source of the sugar turns out not to matter at all. What matters is concentration. And what matters is what else is around it when it enters your body. Strip away the fiber, remove the medium, and you are left with sugar. Whatever shape it arrived in before that point is irrelevant. The monitor doesn't care what you believe about the food. It just shows you what actually happened. Here's the thing that trips everyone up. You can accept that grapes spike your glucose because grapes taste sweet. That part makes sense.
But then you eat a piece of bread and it doesn't taste like anything particularly sweet, and yet there it is on the monitor, a spike. A big one, and it feels like a betrayal. The reason for that is something most people have never been told. Glucose itself is not sweet. What you're tasting in fruit, that sweetness, is fructose, a completely different molecule. And starches, bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, oats, those are not sweet because they're not fructose. They're literally millions of glucose molecules attached hand to hand in a long chain. That's all a starch is, a chain of glucose. The moment you eat it, that chain breaks apart into individual glucose molecules and floods your bloodstream. No sweetness on your tongue, full spike in your blood. The taste gives you no warning at all. Fruit and sugar work differently. What you're eating there is sucrose, which is half glucose, half fructose. The glucose half spikes your blood sugar. The fructose half is what tastes sweet, but doesn't raise blood glucose directly. So the sweetness you taste is actually the part that doesn't spike you. And the part that does spike you, in the bread, in the rice, you can't taste at all. The signal your body was designed to warn you with is attached to the wrong molecule. So what about things that taste sweet but don't spike you at all? They exist. Stevia, monk fruit, allulose. Certain sweeteners hit the taste receptors without triggering a glucose response. And while sweeteners are not perfect, while water will always be better than a diet soda is still meaningfully better for your glucose than a regular can with 30 grams of real sugar in it. The spike, the insulin surge, the crash that follows, none of that happens with sweeteners. That matters. Now here's the one that people genuinely don't want to hear. There is no such thing as good sugar. Not honey, not agave, not maple syrup, not the sugar in a fruit smoothie you made at home with organic berries at 7 in the morning feeling virtuous about your choices. The molecules in that smoothie and the molecules in a slice of chocolate cake are the same. Sucrose. Your body does not read the label. It does not care about your intentions or your Instagram caption. It sees the molecules and responds to the molecules. All sugar is the same sugar, regardless of how much of a health halo the marketing has built around it. So if you're going to have sugar, and you should have sugar, have the one you actually enjoy most. Don't trade a chocolate brownie for a fruit smoothie thinking you're making a healthier choice. You're not. You're just eating dessert and calling it breakfast. Which is actually the real problem, not sugar itself, not carbs themselves, when and how you eat them. A fruit smoothie first thing in the morning on an empty stomach is dessert. Sweet cereal and orange juice is dessert. And starting your day with dessert sets off a glucose and insulin roller coaster that shapes how you feel, how hungry you are, and how your body behaves for the rest of the day. And then there's the bigger picture, which is genuinely uncomfortable to sit with. Evolutionarily, fruit was always part of the human diet. But the fruit that existed before human breeding was less sweet, harder to eat, more fibrous, and more work for the body to break down. Starches are fine too. They have always been part of how humans eat. The problem is that today, for most people, the diet has collapsed down to almost nothing but starches and sugars. The proteins, the organ meats, the fiber, the healthy fats, gone. Replaced by cheap, addictive, heavily processed food that is engineered to keep you eating more of it. And because it's cheap and addictive and everywhere, people are getting sicker at a rate that should alarm everyone a great deal more than it currently does. This is not a personal failing. This is a system that is failing people. And fixing it requires more than individual knowledge, though individual knowledge matters enormously. It requires policy, government involvement, structural change to how food gets made and sold and marketed. Because right now, the food environment is genuinely toxic, and the population is paying for it in chronic illness, in energy, in years of life. But here's where it ends on something real. The transformations happening in people who start to understand this, who start to reclaim some control over their glucose, their energy, their biology, those are genuinely encouraging. People getting their health back, understanding food again, breaking the cycle. That's happening every day. It's not about cutting things out. It's not a diet. It's not deprivation. Chocolate ice cream with a brownie and chocolate sauce and chocolate sprinkles still exists in this world, and there is absolutely a place for it. You just want to know what you're eating, when to eat it, and what it's actually doing inside you when you do. That's not a restriction. That's just being awake to what's happening in your own body. And that, more than anything else, is where the power sits. You want proof. You want a clinical trial. Two groups of people, 30 years old, one group eating clean and steady, the other spiking their glucose every single day, and then you check back in when they're 80 and see who aged faster. That would be the gold standard. And we can't do it. It would be unethical to deliberately damage half the population for 5 decades just to confirm what the correlative data is already strongly suggesting. So instead, we look at what we can see. And what we can see is that people with consistently high glucose levels and high insulin levels are significantly more likely to develop heart disease, dementia, depression, and a long list of other conditions that shorten and diminish life. The mechanism of glycation is understood. The correlation is there. The dots connect, even if the perfectly controlled trial never will. And it shows up on your face. Literally, the skincare industry knows about glycation. They've known for a while. Walk through any serious skincare range and you'll find products specifically targeting glycation, using antioxidants applied to the surface of the skin to try to slow the browning process from the outside in. Which is fine, but it's treating the symptom from the wrong direction. Reducing glucose spikes from the inside through what you eat directly reduces glycation throughout your entire body, not just on the surface, everywhere. It's a straight line. Lower spikes, less glycation, slower aging. If you want to slow down the appearance of wrinkles, yes, wear sunscreen, yes, don't smoke, but look at what's happening with your glucose. That's the lever most people haven't touched yet. Then there's the skin conditions that aren't about aging, but about inflammation. Acne, eczema, psoriasis, rosacea. These are not random. They are your skin acting as a mirror, reflecting something that is happening on the inside. And glucose spikes are one of the things they're reflecting on. Every spike stresses the mitochondria, and stressed mitochondria release free radicals that drive inflammation. Every spike accelerates glycation, which also drives inflammation. Every spike triggers insulin release, and high insulin drives inflammation further. 3 separate pathways, all leading to the same destination. So if you are susceptible to any of these skin conditions, glucose spikes are not just a vague background risk. They can directly trigger flare-ups or make existing ones significantly worse. Now go deeper, because this goes well beyond skin. Hormones, fertility. The conversations happening right now among people in their late 20s and 30s about PCOS, about infertility, about sperm quality, about cycles that have gone unpredictable. Glucose is in that conversation too, and not enough people know it. Here's the chain. The more insulin resistant you are, meaning the more your body has been flooded with insulin over time and has started to stop responding to it properly, the more likely you are to have fertility problems. And PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, one of the leading causes of infertility in women, has a striking overlap with insulin resistance. Around 60% of PCOS cases also involve insulin resistance. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And here's why it matters mechanically. When there is a lot of insulin circulating in a female body, it sends a signal to the ovaries to produce more testosterone. Testosterone is the male sex hormone, and when it shows up in excess in a female body, it causes problems. Acne, hair growth on the face, thinning hair on the head, and it can stop the period entirely. So what usually happens, someone gets diagnosed with PCOS and gets prescribed the birth control pill. And on the surface, that seems logical. The pill introduces female hormones into the body, which temporarily offsets the excess testosterone, and the symptoms ease. But the moment that person stops the pill, trying to get pregnant, the underlying insulin problem is still exactly where it was. The testosterone is still being overproduced. The period doesn't come back. And now they're standing there wondering why, when the answer was sitting in their glucose levels the whole time. It's a charged topic. Some people believe PCOS is purely genetic, fixed, something you manage rather than address at the root. Others believe it is fundamentally a metabolic condition, a cluster of symptoms driven by high insulin, something that responds directly to changes in glucose and insulin levels. And the evidence for that second position is compelling. Not universal, because some people have PCOS without high insulin, which suggests there are variations within the condition that we are only beginning to understand. But for a significant portion of people dealing with PCOS, Fixing glucose and insulin levels causes the symptoms to ease or disappear entirely. That is not a small thing. That is not a footnote. And the fact that most people sitting in a doctor's office with a PCOS diagnosis have never once been told to look at their glucose monitor first, that gap right there is exactly what makes this conversation matter. 3 women, 1 month, 4 simple changes to how they ate, and they got their periods back and became pregnant. Not after years of medication, not after complex interventional procedures. 1 month. That's what happened when the glucose and insulin pictures started to shift. And the 4 things they did weren't dramatic. No elimination diet, no cutting out entire food groups, no starting over from scratch. They added things in rather than taking things away. A savory breakfast, vinegar once a day, vegetables before meals, movement after eating. 4 additions, sitting in your day like what gets described as little fairy godmothers quietly doing their work in the background, and your glucose spikes reduce while you continue eating essentially everything you already love. The effort is low. The impact is not. These things should be treated like brushing your teeth, like wearing sunscreen, like drinking enough water. Not heroic acts of discipline, just quiet daily maintenance that protects you from damage accumulating in the background. Start with breakfast because breakfast is everything. And here's why it matters more than any other meal of the day. If you begin your morning with a glucose spike, your entire day becomes a roller coaster. That is not a metaphor, it is a biochemical reality. A spike leads to an insulin surge. The insulin brings glucose crashing down. Low glucose triggers the craving center in your brain. The craving center starts screaming for more sugar. You eat more sugar. Another spike, another crash, another craving, and you ride that cycle from morning until you fall asleep at night. Confused, tired, foggy, hungry 2 hours after you just ate, unable to understand why you can't stop reaching for things you told yourself you wouldn't eat today. And you started it all with a bowl of cereal and a glass of orange juice, thinking you were doing something reasonable. A savory breakfast breaks that cycle before it starts. It keeps glucose steady. It keeps insulin calm. It keeps the craving center quiet. And it keeps you full, genuinely full, for around 4 hours. Most people eating a sweet breakfast are hungry again in 2. That gap, those 2 extra hours of satiety, is not a small thing across the course of a life. So what does a savory breakfast actually look like? It's built around protein first. Eggs, fish, meat, tofu, nuts, dairy, protein powder, last night's dinner leftovers, all of it works. Then some healthy fat, olive oil, butter, avocado. And if you want something starchy for texture or taste, a piece of bread, some potatoes, that's fine in small amounts at the end. What it contains none of is this: cereal, muffins, granola, orange juice, fruit puree, flavored yogurt, and sugar in your coffee. None of that. If you want something sweet, have it as dessert after lunch or after dinner, when there's already a full meal sitting in your digestive system slowing down the glucose absorption. Not first thing in the morning on an empty stomach when everything races straight into your blood. Now here's the question that matters. Does the roller coaster reset overnight? Mostly yes. Glucose tends to flatten and stabilize during sleep. But there's something else happening that lingers longer than one night. It's dopamine. Sugar triggers dopamine, the pleasure molecule, and if sugar is your primary source of that feeling, your brain starts organizing your cravings around getting more of it. So you have the carrot cake today, and tomorrow your brain is already leaning toward the carrot cake again, and the day after. Not because you're weak, because you've handed your dopamine supply over to sugar, and your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is go back to the source. The way out of that cycle, interestingly, is not willpower. It's finding another source of dopamine. A hard workout, something that floods the brain with the feeling it's been seeking from food. After a significant workout, the last thing most people want is sugar or carbs. The brain has been satisfied through a different channel and it stops pulling so hard toward the sweet things. You shifted the source, and the craving quietly steps back. If you fast, by the way, none of this changes. The first meal of your day, whether it's at 8 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon, should be savory. Because when your digestive system has been empty for hours, it is at its most sensitive. Whatever you give it in that state goes into your bloodstream faster than almost any other time of day. Give it glucose first, and the spike will be significant. Give it protein and fat first, and your system gets a completely different signal to start on. If there is only one thing you take from all of this, make it breakfast. Just that one change: savory, protein forward, nothing sweet until after a real meal later in the day. That single shift alone, for most people, changes everything that follows.
Fasting. Everyone's talking about it, everyone's either doing it or feeling guilty that they're not, and the honest answer is that it's more complicated than the headlines make it sound. In men, the research and the real-world results tend to line up pretty cleanly. It works. In women, the picture is different. Fasting is a stressor on the body. A good stressor, yes, but a stressor. And when you start stacking stressors on top of each other, an intense job, kids to manage, 3 HIIT cardio sessions a week, a sauna, cold plunges, coffee running through your system all day, and on top of all that, fasting, your body doesn't respond with gratitude, it panics. And one of the first things a female body does when it decides it's under too much stress is shut down the systems it considers not essential for immediate survival. The menstrual cycle goes first. The hormones destabilize. And then you're standing there wondering why you feel terrible when you're doing everything the wellness world told you to do. The dose matters. You cannot stack every high-performance habit simultaneously and expect your biology to keep up. Pick your stressors, apply them with some intelligence about what your body can actually handle right now. Fasting has real benefits. It helps the body clean up dead cells, a process called autophagy, and when applied thoughtfully, it can be genuinely useful. But you do not need to fast to be healthy. And if you're fasting for 16 hours a day and then eating junk in the window you do eat, you have not solved anything. The quality of what you eat when you break the fast matters just as much as the fast itself. Both things have to work together. And the simplest guide is this: if you feel good fasting, carry on. If you feel lightheaded, stressed, depleted, irritable, if it feels hard in a way that isn't getting easier, stop. Your body is telling you something. Listen to it. Now, calories. This is one of the more quietly damaging ideas in mainstream nutrition, not because it's entirely wrong, but because it tells such an incomplete story that it ends up misleading almost everyone who follows it. Here's where the calorie actually came from. 100 years ago, to measure the caloric value of a food, scientists would take that food, seal it in a small metal container, submerge that container in a tank of water, and set the food on fire. Then they would measure how much the temperature of the water increased. That temperature rise, that heat generated by burning the food, is a calorie. That is the entire measurement. The heat produced when you set something on fire in a box. So take your carrot cake and burn it in the box. Measure the heat. Now take 3 avocados and burn them. You might get the same heat. Same calories, the numbers say. But the carrot cake is going to spike your glucose, flood your body with insulin, accelerate glycation, drive inflammation, and leave you hungrier 2 hours later than before you ate it. The avocados will do none of that. They will keep your glucose steady, your hunger hormones calm, and your energy consistent. 2 foods with the same caloric measurement doing completely opposite things inside a human body. Because the measurement was never telling you what the food does. It was only telling you how much heat it makes when you set it on fire. That is the foundation on which most dietary advice has been built for a century. What actually works, if the goal is to eat less, to lose fat, to stop feeling hungry all the time, is to focus on glucose. When your glucose levels stay steady, your hunger hormones rebalance naturally. Cravings quiet down. The urgent, almost involuntary pull toward food between meals eases. You eat less not because you're suffering through restriction, but because your body genuinely needs less. The biology stops fighting you. And then there are the stories, the ones that make all of this feel like more than just biochemistry on a page. Women who were weeks away from starting intense fertility treatments, who tried the glucose hacks first, almost as a last small effort before the real medical machinery started, and got pregnant. Those stories don't get easier to hear with repetition. And then there's the man in his 50s. Type 2 diabetes his entire adult life. Mountains of medication. Doctors who had explained the management but never once explained the cause.
He was trying to be healthy, genuinely trying, eating low-calorie rice cakes and fruit smoothies and low-fat yogurts, all the things the labels and the marketing told him were the right choices, and getting worse anyway. Because without the right information, effort is just effort. It doesn't automatically translate into the right action. He read one book. He understood for the first time in his life why his body had gotten to where it was. He did the hacks, and in 1 year, he reversed his type 2 diabetes. His doctors asked how, because this isn't information that consistently makes it into the clinical conversation. And he sent a message that said he would now be able to see his grandchildren's weddings. That is what's sitting on the other side of this information. Not a perfect diet, not a life without chocolate or carrot cake or the things you love, just the actual truth about what's happening in your body when you eat, and enough knowledge to make choices that work with your biology instead of quietly against it. Everyone wants to be healthy. That man wanted to be healthy his whole life. He just didn't have what he needed to actually get there. That's the only thing standing between most people and a completely different experience of their own body. The information. Just the information. Here's something that should stop every parent cold. We used to think type 2 diabetes was an adult disease, something that crept up on you after decades of poor choices, after middle age had settled in, after the damage had been accumulating quietly for 30 years. That was the understanding. That was the category it lived in. 5-year-olds are getting it now. So when a parent looks at a child bouncing around with endless energy and thinks, they're young, they're resilient, it won't matter yet, we'll sort the diet out later, that assumption is no longer safe. The body doesn't wait. The damage doesn't wait. The patterns being laid down right now in those small bodies are the foundation everything else gets built on. And here's the conversation that comes up constantly. Parents who know, who genuinely understand that eggs in the morning would be better than cereal, but their kid is begging for cereal. Standing in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, exhausted, running late, and a small person is losing their mind over the box with the cartoon on it. And the path of least resistance is just, give them the cereal. At least they're eating something. But think about it this way. If that same child was begging for cigarettes, you wouldn't negotiate. You wouldn't say, well, they really want them and I just can't say no. The harm in the cigarette is visible, culturally understood, socially unacceptable to hand to a child. The harm in the cereal and the orange juice is invisible, culturally normalized, and comes in packaging designed to feel like a loving choice. But the harm is still accumulating. It's just quieter about it. Orange juice specifically. Those little cartons in lunchboxes, the big glass poured with breakfast, the thing that feels like vitamins and sunshine and doing right by your child. It is a rush of concentrated sugar hitting a small body on an empty stomach. It affects behavior. It drives tantrums. It creates sugar cravings that build on themselves through the day. It sets the same glucose roller coaster in motion in a child's body that it sets in motion in an adult's, just in a smaller, more sensitive system that has even less capacity to absorb the damage gracefully. Now, and this matters, it is too easy to say all of this without children, standing outside the chaos of actual parenting and describing what the ideal looks like is a very different thing from being inside it at 7 in the morning. That gap is real, and it deserves honesty. But here's something that is also real. What children grow up with becomes their normal. If soda is never in the house, they never develop the pull towards soda. They don't binge on it later because they were deprived of it. They just never learned to want it in the first place. A child who grew up in a house where the mother was addicted to Diet Cola but kept it out of reach, that child grew into someone who finds the taste of soda genuinely unappealing, not through discipline or willpower, through simple absence. The habit never formed because the exposure never happened. That is the quiet power available to every parent right now. Not perfection, not eliminating every spike forever, just deciding what the default is, what the house normal looks like, what the child's palate gets trained on in those early years when everything is still being written. You don't have to get it right every meal, but the question worth sitting with is this: what habits are being installed right now in that small body without either of you fully realizing it? Because those habits have a very long life ahead of them. You know, it's funny. Growing up without much sugar or fizzy drinks in the house, you notice it. You go to school, you see what other kids have, and there's a real pull toward it, a kind of low-grade resentment. But something interesting happens as you get older. That foundation quietly shapes you. The relationship with water, with simple food, with not needing sweetness to get through the day, it's just there, built in without you even realizing it was being built. And parents who do get their glucose under control report something that doesn't get talked about enough. It's not just their own health that shifts, it's how they show up. The constant glucose roller coaster, the spikes, the crashes, the brain fog, the irritability, all of that was shaping how they responded to their kids, their partners, the small daily frustrations of family life. Get that steady, and suddenly there's more patience, more calm, more of the person they actually want to be, present in the room. Which brings us to one of the most quietly brilliant studies I've come across. Scientists recruited 300 married couples. They gave each person a voodoo doll representing their spouse, and they asked them, every time your partner annoys you, put a pin in the doll, for 6 weeks. At the end, the researchers counted the pins, and they also measured everyone's glucose levels. The people with the most volatile glucose, specifically those who experienced the most low glucose events, which happen in the crash after a spike, had put the most pins in their spouse's doll. The most irritating thing, the most reactive, the most easily bothered by the person they chose to spend their life with. The researchers pointed to a neurotransmitter called tyrosine. The more glucose chaos you have running through your system, the lower your tyrosine levels drop. And tyrosine is one of the things that keeps your mood balanced and stable. So the food on your plate is quietly shaping how you feel about the people around you, how much grace you extend, how quickly you snap, how present you are. It goes deeper than diabetes. It goes deeper than wrinkles or energy levels. It touches who you are as a person on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. And think about what that means at scale. So much of what we want from life, the habits we want to build, the work we want to show up for, the relationships we want to maintain, the version of ourselves we keep promising will become, all of it requires focus, steadiness, discipline. And so many people are trapped in a cycle where their cravings are running the show. Their fatigue is making the decisions. They want to reach for the dumbbell or sit down to do the work, and instead they're hunting for sugar at 3 in the afternoon, barely holding their eyes open in a meeting, fantasizing about lying down on the office floor. That's not a willpower problem. That's a glucose problem wearing the costume of a willpower problem. A savory breakfast alone, just that one change, can completely alter how a day feels. Clear brain by mid-morning instead of fog, real energy instead of the desperate fourth coffee, the 3 p.m. crash that never comes. That's not a small thing. That's the difference between the day you planned and the day that just happened to you. Right. The second hack, vinegar. 1 tablespoon in a big glass of water, drunk about 10 minutes before your biggest meal of the day. Repulsive? Yes. Effective? Genuinely remarkable. The acetic acid in vinegar interacts directly with your digestive enzymes and can cut the glucose spike from your meal by up to 30%. No other changes, just that. Any kitchen vinegar works. White vinegar, apple cider vinegar, whatever's already in your cupboard. Just make sure it's the one next to the olive oil, not the one next to the cleaning supplies. And always dilute it. Straight vinegar will quietly damage your tooth enamel, which your dentist will not thank you for. The third hack is one that cultures around the world have been doing instinctively for centuries without knowing exactly why. In Italy, antipasti. In France, raw vegetables before the meal, crudités. In the Middle East, great bunches of fresh herbs to start. Everywhere you look, traditional food cultures begin the meal with vegetables. And scientists have recently worked out the mechanism behind why this is so powerful. Vegetables contain fiber, and fiber, when it arrives in your intestine first, does something remarkable. It coats the intestinal lining, creating a kind of slow, protective mesh. When glucose from the rest of your meal arrives afterward, it can't rush straight through into your bloodstream. It has to move through that fibrous barrier slowly. The spike flattens, the crash softens, You stay fuller for longer. Cravings fade. Carrots, spinach, broccoli, cherry tomatoes, whatever vegetable you actually like, just eat it first, before the pasta, before the rice, before whatever the main event is. The meal stays exactly the same. You just change the order, and your body responds like it's a completely different meal. The fourth hack is almost embarrassingly simple. After you eat, move your body for 10 minutes. That's it. Walk the dog, dance around your kitchen, clean something. And if you're at the office and you'd rather not announce yourself, calf raises under your desk. Just push up onto the balls of your feet, up and down, quietly, for 10 minutes. Nobody sees a thing. Here's why it works. Your calf muscles contain something called the soleus muscle, and it's remarkably good at soaking up glucose from your bloodstream. When you contract your muscles, they pull glucose in to use as fuel. The more you move, the more they absorb, the smaller the spike. It's the same principle as having more muscle mass. You're just actively putting those muscles to work right when the glucose is arriving. And this directly tackles the food coma, that heavy, foggy, can't move feeling after a meal. There's a study in rats that showed something striking. The more glucose spikes they experienced, the slower the signal between their neurons traveled. Their brains were literally slowing down. In humans, that maps directly onto what we call brain fog. Combine that with exhausted mitochondria struggling to make energy, and you've got the classic post-lunch crash. 10 minutes of movement after eating cuts that significantly. You get to actually function after a meal instead of quietly fantasizing about lying on the floor.
So those are the 4 core hacks. Savory breakfast, vinegar before your biggest meal, vegetables before eating, move after eating. And you can even stack 2 of them. Make a vinegar dressing and pour it over your veggie starter. 1 move, 2 hacks done. Now, these 4 hacks were put to a real test. A 4-week experiment, 2,700 people from 110 countries, ages 20 to 70. Week 1, savory breakfast every day. Week 2, add the vinegar. Week 3, add veggie starters. Week 4, add movement after meals. Nothing else changes. No cutting sugar, no eliminating alcohol, no quitting pasta. Just adding these 4 things. The results were genuinely striking. 90% of people reported reduced cravings. 90% reported more energy. Significant improvements in sleep, hormones, skin, mood, and about 40% of people who wanted to lose weight did, without being asked to eat less, without counting a single calorie. Because here's what happens when you flatten your glucose. Your cravings quiet down, your hunger hormones rebalance, and your insulin levels drop. And that last part matters enormously. When insulin is high, your body cannot burn fat. It's too busy storing it. Lower the insulin, and suddenly the door to fat burning opens. Now, there are 6 more hacks. Let's move through them. Eating in the right order. This is the veggie starter idea, taken further. If you eat a meal in the order of vegetables first, then proteins and fats, then starches and sugars last, you reduce the glucose spike of that exact meal by up to 75%. Not a different meal, not less food. The same plate eaten in a different sequence. The fiber goes in first, coats the intestine, and everything that follows moves through more slowly. Clothes on carbs. Anytime you eat something starchy or sweet, never eat it alone. Naked carbs, a slice of bread on its own, a cookie by itself, hit your bloodstream fast and hard. Dress them. Add fat, protein, or fiber alongside. Bread with avocado, carrot cake with Greek yogurt, even grapes with cheese, which sounds indulgent, but actually produces a smaller spike than eating the grapes alone. Traditional food combinations, it turns out, often exist for reasons our ancestors understood instinctively before science could explain them. Ham and melon, rice and beans. These pairings aren't accidents. Savory snacks. If you need something between meals, go savory. An empty stomach is the worst time to send in a hit of sugar. Have sweet things as dessert, not on an empty stomach. If you want the cookie, have it after lunch, after dinner, when there's already food in your system to slow it down.
Nothing is being taken away, just repositioned in your day. And always eat fruit whole. Never juiced, never dried, never blended into a smoothie. Only whole with the fiber intact. The moment you remove that fiber, you've turned fruit into sugar water. One last thing worth saying about all of this. Every graph, every glucose spike illustration, every visual demonstration, it's all rooted in existing clinical studies. The personal glucose data is just a way of making science tangible and immediate, something a research paper can't do by itself. You can hand someone a study, or you can show them what happens to their body in a graph they can actually feel. And sometimes, seeing it changes everything. Now, about that tablespoon of vinegar sitting in a glass of water in front of you. Dilute it. Always dilute it. Your dentist will thank you. And don't be fooled by the fancy branded vinegar drinks showing up everywhere right now. A lot of them have sugar added, which completely defeats the purpose. Cheap, plain kitchen vinegar, 1 tablespoon, big glass of water, 10 minutes before your meal. It sounds too simple to matter. It isn't.